Amile is a French romantic dramedy that came out in 2001. Its plot is about a youngish early 20s girl who, after suffering an awful childhood with a mother who was killed by a suicide attempt and a dad who never gave her any love, she's grown up awkward and strange, and she copes with that by attempting to provide happiness for everyone else in her life, although never finding the happiness for herself. And it's also the journey of her discovering her own happiness and trying to capture that. Now, this film taught me a lot about French cinema and the differences between American cinema, French cinema, how everything down to how the films are made, to their messages and their plot structure. Everything's different. It's not going to be repeating itself. As say, American films may repeat the style of other films and take inspiration from. A French film is very distinctive, especially this one. It feels different. And that's because of a few things that differentiate itself from American films. But first I'm going to be talking about briefly the impact this has had on French culture itself, as this film made $173 million worldwide, which is a lot of money for a romantic dramedy. It's a lot of money for a movie in general. Now, this film not only increased the amount of girls named amile. Before this movie came out, it was about 123. 120, somewhere around there, in the entire country of France. And now, after this movie, it skyrocketed in 1 year to over 1,000. And every single year, the amount of girls named that increases more and more in France, as this was a very huge movie there. One of the most popular ones. It also changed how French movies were made. You know? I'm sorry about the ad. Can't do anything about it. It changed how they were made. It changed the way people viewed movies. Because before this, in the rise of the 90s, the style of cinematography was realistic. It was called the rise of the realistic cinematography in France. You got to see very much more intense, grounded filmmaking, and because that's what people wanted. So they wanted the movies to look realistic. They wanted them to look like real life. This film broke away from that trend and decided to make it seem like fantastical, whimsical. Take all these fantastical, weird elements and create them all in one. I mean, every single frame of this film is digitally edited and recolored to give it more of a fantastical storybooking vibe. It also won 5 Caesars, which is the equivalent of Oscars, and made people look at these type of films in a new light. Also is the highest grossing French film in America of all time. Now, the main thing this movie taught me, is that the differences between French and American films are more startling than you would imagine. You know, usually I went into this presuming it'd be like an American comedy, just in French, you know. There'll probably be different customs I didn't understand, and there is, you know. Things that were a little bit strange to me make more sense. But everything down to the writing, the directing, the plot, it's different. First up, the comedy. In America, we like our comedy very straightforward. Setup, reminder, punchline, the basic 3-hit comedy. It's not like that in this film. The comedy is presented almost flatly, just laid out there on the table, and it's still quite funny. You're still constantly engaged with it. You're still wanting to see what happens next in the film. And you're still laughing at everything it does. It's just this more blatant, awkward comedy that you're going to see more in real life than the more heightened punchline comedian comedy you see more in America. Along with some of the cinematography choices. In America, actors are usually framed to the left or right side of a frame. There's a lot more portraits in this film, where the actors' faces are framed exactly in the middle to create a more, again, storybook vibe, and I think it really goes for that. Also, what it gets away with in terms of the heightened reality of how nice people are, and some things that would come off as incredibly cheesy for American audiences, French audiences loved. And I think that American audiences could connect to decently well, but not as well as, say, most movies will let you. And I think it's just a risk that French filmmakers are willing to take and trust their audience more than American filmmakers are. The plot's much more choppy, but not in a bad way. It cuts to much more different storylines. It's much more confusing than, say, an American film, which is very basic, beat down, trusting the audience as, say, 5-year-olds, treating them like a bunch of little children, walking them through a film. This film, and most French films, treat you much more maturely, letting you try to pick up on a lot of the other things and filling in the gaps yourself, not really explaining much to you in terms of exposition. Also, the patience of the filmmaker and director behind this film is much different. In America, directors usually handle big blockbusters, and that's you get to see someone's skill, how they can handle a CGI screen, what special effects can they make, all of that type of thing. In France, it's French people are much more into these artsy films, and they look down on films that are, say, much more action based without artistic merit. You can see some of the weirder, crazier roots of this film that you wouldn't see in America. I mean, it's naturally built up in the structure in a way that has you always questioning where the story is going to go, but always keeping you invested in the plot. The director, for instance, he took whole streets and whole giant blocks and towns of London, which, most films do, but instead of just shooting there and adding a few little props, he entirely changed most of the set of the real world, because he can't shoot in a studio as he's used to. He's worked in films such as Alien, Resurrection, and he likes the studio feel because he gives him more control. So, because he had to shoot in wide open spaces to really capture France, he would rip down posters and put up new things. He'd create whole architectures, lampposts. He'd repaint entire stairs and walls and all these different things to make it feel more like a magical interpretation of France. And I think that's what he wanted to capture. He was not going for realism. He was going for the extraordinary. And compare that to Hollywood right now, which is obsessed with these dark and gritty reboots and remakes. This was an original, fresh, strange, optimistic tale that can stand out from most other films you're going to see. And I was always in love with the beauty of it, the creativity, and just the amount of charm. This is a great film, and I'm pretty sure if you watch it, you'll fall in love with it too.